Hello, this is Mike Jarvis, and this is my final project for INF678 front-end web development at Fort Hays University. This is the fall semester of 2018. What I did for my final project was an exercise tracker based on CrossFit principles. For those who are familiar with CrossFit, it's varied high-intensity exercises. And I've been doing CrossFit for quite a little while, and I track my results in a notebook, so I always wanted to have a web page or a website that would track my results. So that's what I did for my final project. So let me talk a little bit about how this works. We have enter WOD results, build a WOD, get WOD history, and timers. First, I wanted to demonstrate that this is responsive. I do get the drop-down menu here on the hamburger menu, so it's totally responsive. So let's say we want to enter WOD results, or enter workout of the day. WOD stands for workout of the day. There's a lot of acronyms in CrossFit. So it says select the workout you have just completed, so I'm going to click here on search workouts. There is a database using local storage. Future enhancement would be to use some sort of database like MySQL or some other database. And there's a difference between timed events. So these Nancy, Laura, and Fran, these are timed events. And then the maxes, the various weightlifting maxes, these are amount events where the result is an amount. So let's say we click on Fran here, and it says, congratulations, you completed Fran, enter your results, and you'll notice it asks for a time. These things are dynamic. Let's go back. So instead of doing that, let's do max deadlift. And you'll notice it asks for amount lifted instead of time. So so it is dynamic in that sense. It also, so let's say that I had a good day and maybe I did, I don't know, let's say I did 480 pounds. And you'll notice it turns green. Let's say I was confused and I just typed in some garbage. It turns red like that. This was done using jQuery. And let's say I ignored the red and I just clicked submit anyway, and it says enter a whole number, for example, 445. So I say okay, so let's say I enter, back to my 480. So I did 480 today. So now I go ahead and click on submit. And it says good job, your results have been recorded. Let's go back home. And now I want to go look at the history. Press the button to select the workout history. So I'm going to click here on WOD history. It gives me the same thing here. So I'm going to choose the deadlift. Let's get rid of this. I'm going to choose deadlift. And I get a history for deadlift. So I did 485, 495, 505. Oh, and I dropped a little bit. So this gives me a good visual history of what I'm doing. And also the graph itself, you'll notice it does change sizes and it is responsive. There's a little trick to doing that, but I got that working, so that's pretty cool there. Nice and responsive. And so let's go back home. So a couple other things. We do have build a WOD. That's a future enhancement where I'll be able to dynamically create a new workout of the day. And timers. This is also another future enhancement where I'll be able to go in and select various timers for doing interval training or just timing the timed events. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about my style sheet. So if I go here, go to my style sheet. Pretty typical style sheet, nothing too earth-shattering. the thing, and I did Google around to find this, but this right down here, I just want to draw your attention to these lines 29 to 32. It talks about, this is where for example, if it's an error, I don't display it, but if it's an error show, I change the outline to red, or excuse me, I print out. This is where it prints out what's in the span tag, which has that little error message. So normally that error message is not shown, but if it changes to error show, then it prints out in red. And then the input, if it's invalid, we get that red border. If it's valid, we get a green border. So that's kind of a neat thing that I did with my style sheet. Some of the JavaScript aspect of this, one thing that I'm pretty excited about, if you will, is the clock. I was able to get that clock on every. I just do a document.get element by ID and the clock, and I create a little canvas, and I was able to get that clock to print on every web page right here. So we got it. So it doesn't matter where we go, we still got that clock and the date. So that was all with the helper scripts, the JavaScript helper scripts. And also, it was kind of a little bit of a trick to get the menu. So this right here, well, let's go over this right here. This came up. This is my jQuery. This is on entering the results. So if we've got some input right here, then I did a little regular expression for the timed events. So I have this workout of the day code. So SW stands for strength workout. Then I was just looking for whole numbers. That's what that one there does. But if it wasn't a strength workout and it was a timed workout, so I had to look for all these different combinations to get, hours, minutes, seconds, just to make sure we get some valid input. And then right here, if it's valid, it changes the class from invalid to valid. And if it's not valid, then it changes it from valid to invalid. And so this changes it from red to green, just on the border, which was, I didn't know. You can do some cool things with jQuery, that's for sure. And then this right here is what changes the, if it's not valid, it changes that class to error show, and then that message prints out, and then we've got the messages up here here's my little form. Here's my form, and it says, this field is required. Well, I just mess with this one down here. And what I actually did is I used the JavaScript helper function using that WAD results error message, which is right here. WAD results error message. And then I had to, see, here's my messages. Enter whole number, for example, 445, or enter time. And then I had to look at the params code. And that the parameters I would pass around from screen to screen, and so I always had them, so I could always refer back to the codes, whatever the codes were, because I did a lot of JavaScript and dynamically created some of the verbiage that's on the various web pages. So let's talk about the graph for a little bit. That was pretty interesting. So to graph the results, it was actually pretty sophisticated. I Googled around and I found an Apache function that somebody wrote called bar graph. But one thing that was interesting, to get that graph to be dynamic, in size or responsive. I had to, I think I did it in the helper functions, or no, I think I did graph functions. Did it up here, where I went in and set the, I made the graph response. It's right here. See, I created this canvas, and I mean, I actually created the element. I got the div name. I have this create canvas function, and I set the width to 100%, and I set the height to auto. And when I put that canvas inside of Bootstrap, it just, you saw how it was pretty responsive, and it responded very nicely. So that was a pretty good learning curve, but that's a neat trick. I finally figured out how to do that. So let's go back to the graph results. See right there, there's my div ID graph, and I put it inside of a container, Bootstrap container, call that, and I just create everything in JavaScript. So then when the graph runs, it's right here on line 83. You can see it's an immediately executable function. It just runs as soon as this page loads, and I got some helper functions to get the history of whatever I'm graphing, and then another thing that was kind of tricky was the graph had this concept of a max value, and since the various exercises don't have the same parameters, like I can't push press as much as I can deadlift, for example. So I had to go through the history with these with this function here, which gave me the max value. I got the max value, and then I just added 100 pixels to that. So that became the max value. So my graph will always be proportional to the data that's inside of it, or at least proportional to the highest datum that is inside of it. So so the highest bar will always be able to draw. And then I had to pass in this idea of the workout code so that I could change the label on the bar graph. Because if you'll notice, let me just demonstrate real quick. If you go back here, if I go to the WOD history, so if I get a timed event, like let's say Fran, I had to, if it was timed events, I had to change the value. I used raw seconds when determining how tall to make each graph, and the function does that. But then I wrote this helper function to change this label back into time. And if I wanted to do like a weightlifting event, then I just left it at the raw values, which makes sense. So getting back to my my code here. So this function, this graph function, was pretty sophisticated. This guy who wrote it, William Malone, did a great job. I had to modify it a little bit. Like I had to pass in that WOD code. I had to create this helper function that converts the raw seconds into hours, minutes, and seconds. See, there's my WOD code. And then up in here is where I've got a little if statement. See if I can find it real quick. Where yeah, right here. So I create this concept of a new label. And if it's a timed event, that's what the MW means, then I would convert it. The new label would become, the hours, minutes, and seconds format. And then I would, this right here, this context field text, the new label would go right there. And that's how those bars got labeled. Anyway, I really learned a lot on this project. There's some future enhancements that I can work on, but I learned a lot, and I feel like I could make some good future enhancements.